Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. Ukraine War news update, goodness knows what update it is for today. It's still, I'm hanging on to the 11th of September 2024. It won't be when you listen to this if you are on that side of the world, and it won't be when you listen to this in a few hours time on this side of the world, so who knows. I have a massive long list of things I want to talk about, well, in this video, but also in my geopolitics video, and it's too late for me to do that. I've had a couple of glasses of Tempranillo. I'm just trying to get a cup of tea in, watching The Gone, which is a Kiwi Irish crossover series, detective series on BBC iPlayer. And it just reminds me how much I love New Zealand. I bloody love New Zealand. Lived there for a year backpacking around. Just listening to Fur Patrol, Lydia, great song, and a few other classic Kiwi songs that I love. And just thinking, I'm going to have to watch some Kiwi films. Maybe watch Whale Rider with my kids. Want to show them that. It's just an amazing... Kira Castle-Hughes, just outstanding acting in that as a kid. And then all the classic ones I've still got on DVD somewhere, like the Stickmen and... Sione's Wedding. What's that film? It's just like Shallow Grave. It's based in Dunedin. I'm gonna have to Google that. In fact, halfway through Googling that, I'm sure it's called Scarface. Is it called Scarface? I think it had a British name and an international release name. Scarface. Yep, Dunedin. 5 Dunedin students find themselves in a free squat, a dark place. Yeah, brilliant film. Loved it. Anyway, I'm going to have to go down a New Zealand rabbit hole. Bloody love the Kiwis. Anyway, let's go to military aid. You don't want to know any of that. There's been an awful lot of stuff going on today because David Lammy from UK Foreign Minister, and Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State for the US, have been in Kiev along with, I think, others. And it's all about weapons restrictions and the lifting of those restrictions in terms of firing Storm Shadow, firing ATACMS deep into Russian territory. Okay, so that's the kind of context. There have been all these letters going out. So this is Congressman Bill Keating. The stakes in Ukraine, he says, are incredibly high. Today I wrote to Jake Sullivan calling on the administration to allow Ukraine to use ATACMS and other US-made weapons against legitimate military targets in Russia, regardless of location, which threaten Ukraine. Here is my letter. And you can pause that and read his letter showing, strong convictions for the lifting of restrictions. Then we hear that HFAC Chair McCall. So we've heard from him over the last few days, and the rumor is that Blinken is going to be sort of releasing those restrictions anyway. HASC, so we've got Security Committee and Foreign Affairs Committee, HPSCI Chair Turner, Chair Rogers, HACD Chair Calvert, HFACE Chair Keane, and Helsinki Commissioner Hudson. Out with a renewed request to President Biden to lift restrictions on ATACMS. Hopefully, we'll see more Democrats echo these calls. So here we have Republicans, I think, here making that call. And then underneath, he says 7 House Dems signed onto a letter from Turner back in May. And Senator Kelly, so that's Mark Kelly, who is the Arizona senator who was touted for vice president, although he didn't get it. He's strong on defense and strong on support for Ukraine. He's recently expressed support for lifting restrictions. Important for more Democrats to speak out publicly about this and maintain bipartisan pressure. And actually, that's clearly the case. So it appears that actually more Democrats and Republicans have done that now. So Kyiv Independent reports that at least 20 House Democrats. So you've got to remember that the House of Representatives, the kind of lower house, if you like, and the Senate, that has far fewer, so 100 senators. I forget what it is, 428 House Representatives. Anyway, 20 House Democrats and 5 House Republicans are calling on Joe Biden to lift restrictions on Kyiv's use of American long-range weapons to strike inside Russia, according to a letter obtained by the Kyiv Independent. Okay, so point is there's bipartisan support from the US for lifting of these restrictions. Senate Foreign Relations Committee says, given the escalating Russian attacks on civilian targets across Ukraine, Chair Senator Cardin is urging the easing of restrictions on Ukraine's, so he's a US Senator from Maryland, on Ukraine's use of US provided weapons, adding that America, quote, must act swiftly to grant these permissions. He's a Democratic senator from Maryland. So Biden is apparently to discuss with the UK Prime Minister allowing Ukraine to strike deep into Russia, according to Euromaidan Press here. Biden's set to meet with Keir Starmer, UK Prime Minister, on September 13th. Now, there were some rumours that Biden was going to meet with Zelensky, but it was apparently a mistranslation. I presume this is happening, but maybe not, I don't know. And they will discuss allowing Ukraine to conduct long-range strikes deep into Russia, Blinken said. I think that is happening because there is this idea that Keir Starmer is going to be pressuring Biden to release the Kraken, to allow Storm Shadow to be used, for example. It appears very clear now that, and this has come out today as well, that the UK has been keen to allow Ukraine to strike with whatever it wants, where it wants, as long as it's kind of within the confines of military law and whatnot. But it's very clear that the UK has been fine with Ukraine's use of Storm Shadows deep into Russia, but it's the US that's been holding them back. Okay, so Anthony Blinken has said the US is providing Ukraine with more than $700 million in funding to restore its energy system, to provide humanitarian support, and to provide demining capabilities. Okay, so that's really important, good stuff. So a package of not military aid, but other aid to Ukraine, super important. So US provides Ukraine with more than $700 million in that funding. And the US Secretary of State, Blinken, also said that he had discussed the authorization of long-range missiles with the Ukrainian leadership and would now report on the outcome of the talks to Biden. So doing this, I mean, it's pretty obvious what people want. So he's doing this fact-finding mission, getting influenced by the UK and others, and then taking that back to Biden. So Igor Sushko says President Biden responds to a question on whether he will lift restrictions to allow Ukraine to strike military targets in Russia with long-range missiles such as ATACMS and Storm Shadow. Quote, we're working that out right now. And of course, like I've said to you before, this whole having the debate out in the open is so counterproductive. It just ramps up it amplifies the seriousness of this, and it makes it far more of a consequential decision than it need be. If they just not had this discussion in public and this had happened in private, and then suddenly Ukraine was able to hit, you wouldn't even realize it. I've argued this before, that you have a bit of creep. So turns out that today there's a target that's been hit, not 84 kilometers from the border, but 94 kilometers. And then the next week, 110 kilometers. And then the week after that, 150 kilometers. And there's that creep, and there's no kind of definitive, you're allowed to do whatever you like, but it's just like bit more. And like boiling a lobster in a pot, there's no one point where it's like, it's just this gradual movement towards the objective there for the Ukrainians. Now, John Ridge says it's obligatory that Politico or their sources don't understand ITAR. On my knees, tears in my eyes, begging people to realise export controls and use controls are not the same. That some Storm Shadow Scalp EG rounds may contain control components is irrelevant to US targeting restrictions. So this is a perennial misreported thing. So Politico, for example, say, quote, the White House is finalizing a plan to see some restrictions on how Ukraine can use US donated weapons. Emphasis on some restrictions confirms Bloomberg's reporting that Ukraine will not be free to strike whatever they deem militarily necessary. It seems like pretty limited policy change. So it might be that it's not just you can do what you like type thing, but actually maybe you can only hit these targets that we give you permission to hit in these kind of ranges or whatever. But also John Ridge is saying that this isn't a thing to do with exports. This is to do with just permission to do stuff. So it's not export control because there are components in the missiles. Storm Shadow, UK have given permission. US have blackmailed, effectively, that's the easiest way to understand it, blackmailed the Ukrainians by saying, yeah, okay, you can use that. You can freely use those UK missiles, they've given you permission. We're not stopping you, but if you do, we won't give you this, that, and the other. Okay, Ukrainian armed forces have almost exhausted their stockpile of ATACMS missiles handed over by the United States, according to CNN. According to US official, Ukraine was handed several hundred ATACMS and Ukraine has used most of them. At the same time, the US has a limited stockpile of these missiles, which can be transferred without affecting its military readiness. So it's a bit of mixed messages there. Not quite sure what they're trying to say there. Like we've got a bunch more, and they're not going to affect our military readiness. So you can have them, but then there must be, are there strategic reserves? At what point, and will the US include these in arms packages soon? Because it'd be great if they can use these, if they used most of them up. I've seen a few people speculate as to how many they might have left. Some saying, well, actually, they've got possibly 80 left. Some saying that they haven't used them for 2 months. So I don't know. Publication also writes that a group of Republicans in Congress urged Biden to lift restrictions on strikes on Russian territory with US weapons, arguing that, quote, the administration's fears of conflict escalation have been consistently refuted since the very first day of the war. And that's absolutely true. Okay, so Blinken has said, quote, we are fully implementing our commitments and will continue to deliver new air defense systems to Ukraine in the coming weeks. There have been these concerns that the promises from the NATO conference of having, what was it, 5 extra air defense systems, we're talking Patriot, PAC-2, PAC-3, SAMP-T, okay, top air defense systems. I think it was 5 they're going to get, and they have had only a fraction of those systems, and so it could be that actually the US is finalizing the delivery of some of that, and that's going to happen very soon. Fingers crossed. Right. Kyiv Independent reports that the UK has already privately decided to allow Ukraine to use its British-supplied Storm Shadow missiles for long-range strikes deep into Russia, The Guardian reported today, citing unnamed UK officials. So I think I was frustrated previously, and I know, yes, I support the Labour government more than I supported the Conservative government because of my predilection in terms of political alignment. But I thought it was unfair the way that it was being reported by some news outlets. So I think the Daily Telegraph reported it badly. I think the Times may have reported it badly. That they're saying, Keir Starmer's not allowing Storm Shadows to be used. And it was blatantly obvious that he was. I mean, he publicly said it. Like he said, you can use these, not a problem. A couple of days later, MOD said, no, not too sure about that. So he was put in his place by the MOD, who were put in place, it seems, by the US. So it's all about the US restrictions. I'm not trying to get Keir Starmer off the hook or Britain off the hook because of my, my own political context. But that's clearly the case. So it annoyed me when I think people found an excuse to bash Keir Starmer over the head with this, when it clearly, obviously wasn't his doing. Anyway, that aside, Britain has announced themselves a new aid package for Ukraine worth more than $780 million. So I think it's £600 million. The package will include hundreds of additional air defense missiles, tens of thousands of artillery rounds and armoured vehicles expected to be delivered by the end of the year. Now, I'm not quite sure what's going on here. I've heard lots of figures and lots of different calculations with what the UK is giving. And in fact, I don't have it here. So let me find that for you. Yeah, so this is what I'd seen. David Lammy announced at least £242 million, $315 million of funding to support Ukraine in the face of Russian attacks, and a deployment of $484 million of fiscal support as well as military equipment. So there's all sorts of different combinations of stuff that we're given. I think there's energy support, fiscal support. We are also guaranteeing loans as well, as far as I understand it, for Ukraine too. So yeah, package is pretty substantial there. On top of that, Lithuania and Latvia announced aid packages themselves for Ukraine during their own visits to Kyiv. Lithuania committed $11 million to enhance Ukraine's long-range capabilities, including funding the Palencia rocket drones. So that's really good news. Ukraine have been asking for funding to match that gap of capacity that they have, potential and actual. They're just missing funding to get their capacities up to what they can produce, while Latvia pledged a military package including armoured personnel carriers. They might well be these, because Jeff 2146, who tracks these things, says military aid to Ukraine has been updated with an unknown number of Patriot common armoured vehicle system armoured personnel carriers to be delivered in 2025 from Latvia. So that's really good news. Obviously, there might be a bit of a lag before they get them. So yeah, UK would also provide $600 million in loan guarantees for World Bank lending to Ukraine before the end of 2024. So that's super important. Latvia will continue to train the Ukrainian military and already plans support for 2025, which will amount to 0.25% of its GDP. So they are really helping out. Those Baltic nations doing a fabulous job, as well as the Nordic nations too, and Poland. So the IMF, International Monetary Fund, and Ukraine have agreed, not the IMF from Mission Impossible, of course. The IMF and Ukraine have agreed on a sixth loan tranche of 1.1 billion spondulis, dollars. This was announced by Prime Minister of Ukraine, Denis Shmyhal. He noted that Ukraine had met all quantitative criteria and structural benchmarks by the end of June. Now the IMF Executive Board has to approve the agreement. And those are, some of those are that Ukraine's 2024 first quarter GDP growth at 6.5% and inflation now at 5.4%, the IMF opens the door to another tranche of aid. So they've kind of checked off some objectives they had for the growth of their economy, evidently, in order to qualify for those loans. Okay, so good news for Ukraine, as Russia, says Tim Wright, loses a court bid to release its funds invested in the EU. So this should help Russian cash make its way to Ukraine. That's really good news. If we have a little look at this, Russia's National Settlement Depository lost a bid to overturn a European Union sanctions over its alleged role in helping fund Putin's invasion of Ukraine. A Moscow-based institution was hit with EU sanctions in 2022 when the bloc alleged that, as the main custodian of Russian securities, the body enabled the Russian government to mobilize its resources to support the war effort. So on and so forth. The depository currently has 70 billion euros and mobilized at Euroclear. So these are some of the funds that Euroclear has hold of. I think it's 300 billion in total, isn't it? And that's hopefully going to be put to good use. And there's obviously been a legal challenge here, which has fallen flat. So good news for Ukraine. Sweden. Now, I've reported this before, I think. It just keeps coming up every day. But Sweden allocates an additional, so I don't know if it's like an extra amount, an additional 40 million euros for Ukraine for the purchase of equipment that will improve the situation with energy supply in the regions subject to constant hostile shelling. Good news there, although I may have already reported that. So the Ukrainian Defense Ministry has said that Lithuania is providing, as mentioned, 10 million euros to finance the long-range capabilities, including the Palencia rocket drone. This is a huge support that will help Ukraine defend itself even more effectively, according to their defense minister, Rustem Umerov. This is really good news, and there needs to be much more support of the indigenous military industry in Ukraine. Okay, speaking of which, testing of a Ukrainian FPV drone equipped with an RPG, so a rocket-propelled grenade launcher, the RPG-18 Muka grenade launcher. So here you can see a drone, and we've seen elements of this before. Like over a year ago, I was showing you how they were playing around with drones with these ATGMs, but I don't know that they got too far. You just need a decent sized drone to be able to handle that, and also be able to acquire targets, lock on, not be shot out of the sky because you're a big old drone, being easily spotted and quite loud, no doubt, and also not have, I don't know whether recoil is an issue with something like this, but certainly with, I guess, the heavy machine guns that they put on some of these drones, and fly them in the air. And I've seen some footage of these being used in combat, but I don't know whether recoil is an issue that will mean that they are less accurate, etc., etc. Okay. Ukraine, according to the Kyiv Independent, approves domestic-made Black Widow bomber drones for military use. These Black Widow unmanned aerial vehicles have been approved today, so that's good news there. Don't know if there's any more information. Black Widow is a tactical level drone that can be used both during the day and at night. The quadcopter can also operate in the FPV strike format, which is possible due to its low price compared to other models. So good news there. Other models in this format, the Black Widow can take on board an enhanced explosive charge, says someone else. Okay, moving on. We're going to Russian information now. So Beijing, this is breaking news from Politico. Beijing is giving Moscow, quote, very substantial help to beef up its war machine, and in return, Russia is sending over its closely guarded military tech on submarines and missiles, according to US Deputy Secretary of State Kurt Campbell. This is huge. Now, we'd heard rumours about this over the last few months. I've reported this previously, that actually China are starting to send more significant goods over to Ukraine. I think it was broken originally by the British, and then the US denied this, and now they're admitting it. And I don't know whether it was because the US were trying to keep it quiet, or whether the US just didn't know about this and subsequently do know about this due to intelligence sharing from the UK to the US. But now the US have publicly admitted that the Chinese are giving more significant stuff to Ukraine. Now, this is, of all the things I've said today, and all that money that's going to Ukraine, all that help and all that military assistance, etc., etc., this is arguably the most serious thing mentioned today. I have said since the beginning of the war, like literally, was it a week into the war? I said Russia had lost. I wrote an article that Russia have lost the war and they can't win it because they can't achieve the objectives they initially set out to gain, which was control of the entirety of Ukraine by replacing the government with the puppet government. They can't do that now. They were unable to get to Kiev and do that. Okay, so what's their plan B, C, D, E? Who knows? But they appear to have failed with most of those plans, had they been moved further and further back to now fighting over parts of the Donbass. Okay. I have also added the caveat that the only way that they can succeed in this war is if China properly supports them. So where Ukraine are getting the military and financial support of these allied nations and the Defense Contact Group of Ramstein and all that, they're getting upgraded military equipment, they're getting help, lots of help in many different ways. And Russia are getting very limited help, North Korea and Iran, and dual-use goods from China. But if that turns from dual-use goods to over-supplied military equipment, then these things can change. And the calculations start changing. You know, when you make these claims, it's always ceteris paribus. So all things remaining equal, Russia have lost this war. Unless something drastic changes. And that something drastic, really the only way, I said previously, the only way Russia can prevail in this war is if China essentially fully allies itself with Russia. I mean fully. And this is a step towards that. So this is insanely worrying stuff from China. Okay, so as Geo Insider says, the quote from the Politico article, these are no longer dual-purpose technologies. The US accuses China of providing, quote, very significant aid to the Russian Federation. If earlier Washington accused Beijing of supplying dual-purpose goods to the aggressor, now the rhetoric has changed. US Deputy Secretary of State Kurt Campbell said that the military cooperation between China and the Russian Federation reached a new, quote, alarming level. Quote, these are not dual-purpose technologies. Recent Chinese supplies to the Russian Federation are actually used directly in the Russian military machine. We see efforts at the highest level of both governments to hide certain elements of this disturbing cooperation. Now, we know that they got well over 1,000 Golf buggies, these Desert Cross 1000-3. I mean, that's at the bottom end of over military equipment. They were able to do that because it's, hey, we're just selling them these golf buggies, whatever, and then they use them in a military context. But it's likely to be things like rocket motors. I don't know. I'm completely speculating here, but stuff that's rather than like a jet plane or a tank or something like that, which would be too obvious, is going to be things that can be used, like microchips, stuff like that can be used in their weaponry, so that they can build a ton of these Shahed drones and a ton of these missiles of differing types. I think one of the biggest things is going to be real-time intelligence through satellite imagery. I think that's one of the biggest challenges to Ukraine that they need to make sure that China isn't doing, but I don't know how you stop that from happening. Anyway, in exchange for Beijing's help, Russia began transferring sensitive technologies to China, says the article, although Moscow has always been wary of transferring its latest military technology to Beijing. Quote, the opportunities provided by Russia are support in those areas where before they frankly did not want to interact directly with China. So you've got to remember that China and Russia have this very difficult relationship. They aren't like best of mates. There's this marriage of convenience between them because they have certain global economic and geopolitical objectives that are shared. But outside of that, even though you might think they're ideologically aligned, really both nations, particularly China actually, are very transactional, and it's all about making decisions that benefit them. And yeah, so everything they do is fairly mercenary, really. And Russia know that. There have been these worries from Russian generals that they're becoming more and more of a vassal state of China. They were worrying about that before the war started. And actually, since the war has taken place, they've inexorably moved towards being this indeed vassal state of China. And those same generals are worrying that their initial concerns have been realized. So, yeah. This applies to submarines, aviation equipment, in particular, stealthy missile potential, said Campbell. According to him, the new technologies that Beijing receives will pose a danger not only to the US, but also to India, Australia, Japan, and South Korea. So many different nations are potentially concerned with this move towards a greater cooperation between the two nations militarily. Okay, no reports. So, North Korea, they say, has continued to supply advanced short-range ballistic missiles, specifically the Hwasong-11, to Russia despite sanctions. Investigators from Conflict Armament Research, who analysed remnants of these missiles in Kyiv on September the 3rd, found at least one missile used in an August the 18th attack was produced this year. Missiles from July and August lacked clear manufacturing dates. So it's interesting that they're getting missiles from North Korea that have been manufactured this year. And they're being manufactured. It's not like North Korea giving them old stock, crappy stock they've had hanging around for 30 years in a warehouse. Manufacturing that, getting it to Russia. Russia are using it. It's hitting Ukraine. A group of people are analysing the remnants, and they're finding that, that is a bit of a worry. Okay, so here that's coming in the New York Times that North Korea is supplying Russia with these short-range Hwasong-11 missiles. I just thought it was interesting to add that the DPRK continued to produce these missiles despite the sanctions while Russia successfully imports them. I don't know what more can be done with North Korea. It's almost like North Korea just like, no one likes us. We're sanctioned to the hilt. What more can you do? Our population live in a perpetual isolation. Like, the only people, like Kim Jong-un's like, the only guy that likes me is Trump. And judging by the debate last night, he's not looking good. So sod it. I'm going to give some missiles to Russia. Who gives a damn? And Russia, like, sod it. Like, we don't get this stuff, we're screwed. So we need as much of that stuff as we can get. Yeah, we'll do anything that China wants us to do. It's going to be really deeply inappropriate there. We'll do anything China wants us to do and we'll give them this, that, and the other because we need their stuff. And Iran will give you the old S300 and a couple of airframes, and yeah, we'll have your stuff as well. That's who we're dealing with. Those are our mates: North Korea, Iran, China, and there you go. That's where Russia are at the moment, geopolitically speaking. Anyway, that's enough waffling from me. Way too long. Thank you very much for listening. Really appreciate your support. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.